Hi, Dad.
Hi, Tony. How are you?
I'm good. Here we go. So today's date is July 3rd, 2018, and we're in Naples, Florida. And please, what's your full name?
Roger Albert Zucker.
And the Aloysius came from?
My mother wanted me to have a saint's middle name, and the actual birth certificate just has an A.
Yeah, I remember when I was a kid, you always said it was Aloysius. And how old are you now?
88 and a half.
And your birth date is?
January 16th, 1930.
And where were you born?
Cleveland, Ohio.
And do you know where your mother was born?
No, I do not.
I think it was Ashtabula.
Could have been Ashtabula.
What about your dad?
Cleveland, Ohio.
And his birth date's November 3rd.
1899, I believe.
Do you know why your dad's family immigrated to America?
No.
Do you have any idea where they initially settled?
I think they initially settled in Cleveland.
Okay. Do you remember hearing any stories about why your ancestors came to America?
No.
Okay. Do you know what country they were from?
I believe Germany.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about your grandparents. Your grandfather on your dad's side.
Yeah.
Do you remember him?
He died when my father was about 7 years old.
Okay. And what about
His mother died when he was 17. I never knew any grandparents on my father's side.
Okay. Do you remember your grandparents on your mother's side?
The only one I met was her mother, and she died when I was very young.
Okay. That's a dog drinking in the background. All right. So I guess you don't have a lot of information on that.
I'm sorry.
It's okay. Do you know how your parents met?
Yeah. No, I don't.
All right. And did your mom work when she was?
She was a RN.
Was she an RN when you were growing up too?
No, she was not. When I was growing up, she just was a mother.
Okay. And Irene had some talents and interests. What were they?
She liked to play the piano. She was very much into, the art museum and stuff like that. But she liked to play the piano. She practiced every night, or almost every night. She liked classical as opposed to modern.
And you had a piano in your home growing up?
We had it. She got hold of a Steinway from a client of my father's.
And the one that was in her apartment for years?
That's it.
And that was in your house as you grew up as well?
Absolutely.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Did you play it all, Dad, or did you
No,
try?
not
What
at all.
about your brothers?
None of us.
Okay.
Cool.
And also, it's okay. Do you know? I also remember, didn't your mom Irene? Didn't she ice skate?
Yeah, she did. She liked to ice skate. And period. She liked to ice skate, and a lot at the Elysium in Cleveland.
Yeah, I remember when she broke her leg ice skating.
She broke her hip.
Broke her hip.
Yeah.
Okay. We have a dog here. This is
Down.
Chloe, who's interrupting our
Go
interview.
ahead. I got her.
Let's talk about your dad a little bit. Tell me a little bit about your dad. Where did he come from, and where did he grow up?
He grew up in Cleveland, Ohio.
Okay.
Went to Columbia University, law school.
Do you know where he went to undergrad?
I assume Columbia also.
And he was born in Cleveland?
To the best of my knowledge.
Do you know anything about his childhood?
Nothing. He had two brothers, Walter and Alvin. He was the youngest.
What did your dad look like?
He looked like just, I don't know, he had dark hair, a nice looking guy. He was about 5'7", and loved sports, loved playing racquetball. tennis, handball, anything along that line.
Okay. What did your dad do for work? Well, he was an attorney, but
He was an attorney. He represented the Carpenters Union. He liked trial work. He got a job as, he was police prosecutor in Cleveland Heights. He loved that job. Because he had to go in unprepared, just had to do it off the cuff.
and
He liked trial work.
and do you still have that badge of his from when he was a prosecutor of Cleveland Heights?
Yes, I gave it to Johnny though.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they gave him, the police department gave him a badge. Yeah.
Do you remember any other? So was he a member of a law firm when he was in
He was a
Cleveland?
member of several. The last law firm he was with a man by the name of Ed Schwein, and that was his law partner. A fellow named Arthur Stern. And then he retired. If you're asking about my father, he found out he had high blood pressure one day and quit. Stopped playing all the sports and became a real basket case. And just totally disintegrated and died his life became very bad. Had to take care of, ended up managing his life.
Yeah, I remember when he used to come over for spaghetti dinner, and he had trouble walking, and we would walk him to
Right.
the bathroom as kids.
We took him to the football games, and I don't know if we had a wheelchair to get him to the chairs or not, but in any event, he went downhill quick.
Now let's talk about the football games. In my house, I have a picture of the 1964 championship plain dealer, and then also your ticket stubs. Did you go to that game with your dad?
I'm sure I did.
Do you remember?
You were there, weren't you?
No, I was 4. I wasn't invited.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sure I went to the game.
Yeah. Do you remember it? Do you remember that game at all?
Not much, no.
27-0.
No.
Browns beat the Colts. Gary Collins had, I think, 3 touchdown
you
catches.
probably know more about it than I do, but I remember that we won the game.
Okay. What was your?
I started going to professional football games when I was 7 years old, watching the Cleveland Rams. I saw the Cleveland Rams play in Shaw Stadium. If people know where that, and they used to play at League Park.
Do you remember that was the Rams?
The Cleveland Rams, and then their famous quarterback was Bob Waterfield, and he left Cleveland, went out to the Rams and married Jane Russell.
And then when the Browns started, and
We had season tickets from the get-go, 1946, I believe they started, and the families had those tickets ever since.
and
We've gone to the Browns.
do you remember the first season when they played the Eagles?
That we won the championship that year.
Right. Yeah, in their first season.
But
Going back to your dad a little bit, do you know anything about his life before he married your mom?
no, not at all.
Okay.
He said in the Second World War he fought at the Battle of, the First World War he fought at the Battle of Way Park Lagoon.
Tell me a little bit. Do you know anything more about that?
No, he was, I guess, in the Navy Reserve or something.
Do you have any story that would be a good story to kind of characterize your dad?
No, he just liked to fish. He liked to fish. Went on a lot of fishing trips. We went to Canada a lot, went fishing. That's about it with him.
Do you remember any other childhood memories?
Not really. I remember myself, at one point we were eating dinner at the Alcazar Hotel for some reason. Anyhow, I had what is called St. Vitus dance, actually it would say scarlet fever. I couldn't throw a baseball or anything. I lost coordination for a while. And they made me stay in bed for a month. And my father brought home, should have kept them, the first Superman magazine came out, the first Batman magazine came out. And they kept me in a dark room, and then they
You
sent me,
gotta talk a little louder because the dog's
then they
huffing and
sent me
puffing.
out to a farm for a month where I was supposed to rest up. And I woke up the first morning at 7 o'clock and found out everybody was up. So the next day I got up at 5 o'clock with everybody. And it was a place called Herd's Farm, and that was a good experience. I enjoyed that. That was my first real experience with farm life. And they had a couple of plow horses I used to go out and sit on top of. Anyhow, that's history.
How old were you?
My guess I was 7 or 8. For 1946, I was 6. Wait a minute.
You were,
When that happened, they came out with that magazine, the Superman magazine, when I was about probably 7 years old, 1937 or something like that. I think that's when the first Superman magazine came out.
what do you remember about the Depression?
The only thing I remember about the Depression is the people, there was going to be a man going up the street with a cart yelling paper rags, and people coming by and asking if they could dig up the weeds in the front yard and take them home to cook, that kind of thing. That's about all I remember about the Depression.
Then in the 40s, so World War II started when you were just turning into a
I was
kind of a
15 years
teenager.
old. Yeah, that's right.
How old were you, Dad?
I believe I was about 12 or 13 when I read 1940.
Do you remember Pearl Harbor Day?
Oh yeah, I remember that, and going downtown the next day at my father's office and listening to Roosevelt declare war
And how did you hear that?
on the radio, standing at he had an office in the Hanna building. And we were standing in the, I don't know, in a lobby someplace with a radio and listening to Roosevelt declare war on Germany. Yeah, I mean Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And then they entered the war against Germany shortly after that.
Was there anything unusual about your dad?
What was unusual about my father is he couldn't behave himself. And he didn't learn from it. I don't want to get into therapy on it, but as I look back on my life, my father did some stuff that I considered pretty inappropriate. And I don't know if you want to get into that or not.
No, we can pass on that, Dad. There's no
Uh,
reason to hear any details on that unless you want to share it.
No, it's...
Okay, let's shift it a little bit then. What were some of his talents and skills? Was he a tennis player like you?
He was a very good tennis player. He was a very good handball player. And that was his sports.
And what, did he belong to any clubs or anything when you were growing up?
My father,
Yes.
the only club he belonged to eventually is when he remarried and we got to in Oakwood Club.
Oakwood Club?
Yeah. And he screwed that marriage up too.
Okay. What about his friends, other than lady friends?
Well, I don't know if he had any real buddies. I mean, he used to like to have his tennis games with his regular tennis games, and that was about it that I know of. I don't know of him. Oh, and he used to have a regular bridge game with a couple of doctors, and I'm trying to remember their names. Anyhow, they used to play bridge once a week downstairs, smoke cigars and play bridge.
Downstairs at your house?
Yeah. Well, they used to trade house to house, but
Right.
periodically they'd come to our house and do that.
Was it festive?
I beg your pardon?
Was it festive? I mean, would they have beer and
Oh,
play
yeah,
cards?
sure.
And
And smoke cigars all over the place.
do you remember watching them play?
No, no.
And
Hertmeyer, yeah. Hertmeyer, Maury Calley, and Ralph Hertz, the three doctors.
okay, a little louder, okay, Dad?
Okay.
Tell me a little bit more about. Do you think you inherited any special skills or talents from your dad?
My ability to play tennis, I was a pretty decent athlete, and I probably got that from him.
Mm-hmm.
And I inherited some of his DNA, which I had to fight like crazy to get over. It took me 30 years to get over it and to learn from mistakes. And the last 32 years have been unbelievably good.
Well, that's good. Tell me a little bit more about your dad's personality. Was he fun? Did he tell jokes like you?
He was a pretty outgoing guy. He liked to dance. He had no problem pulling practical jokes, which, as far as I was concerned, sometimes were not too. He thought it was funny, and I didn't.
Any? Oh well, then probably any that you don't. I don't want you to have to share anything that's not fun.
No.
Did he have a good sense of humor though?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
He just, yes.
What were his religious beliefs?
Well, he was Jewish, but he didn't go to church or to synagogue. He wasn't. He just didn't.
Was he raised Jewish?
I assume so. I have no idea. I don't know if he was bar mitzvahed or anything.
His middle name was Adolf.
That's
right?
correct.
Yeah, so that's probably one of the last people named Adolf.
You're not kidding.
After.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about do you remember any kind of bedtime stories or anything that he told you? Any kind of fun stories?
No. I do remember when they needed a Chief Justice for the Supreme Court, I thought I should try to promote him.
Tell me a little bit about that.
In my mind as a kid, they were looking for a Supreme Court Justice, and I wanted to recommend him to be on the Supreme Court. Of course, it's ridiculous. They wouldn't consider it, but at the time, I thought it would be a nice thing. He was a very good attorney, and anyhow,
as a kid,
typical son, having his father as an idol, no question about it. My biggest problem was being raised Catholic, quite frankly, and wondering if his being Jewish and what they were telling me is if I was going to see him in heaven, because I figured they were telling me only Catholics went to heaven, and my father was going someplace else, and that bothered me a lot.
Oh, that must have been unsettling as a child.
Oh yeah, until I wised up. But at the time, I always remember worrying about that. I also remember when they changed the Pledge of Allegiance and stuck in under God. That was interesting to me.
I'm just making sure this is still recording well. Yeah, it looks like it's doing great. Anything else that you want to... Do you get any heirlooms from your dad?
I have a cigar box over there.
Oh, yeah?
That's it.
What do you think the most important thing you learned from your father is a positive quality?
I don't think I learned anything from him about that. You know, I went to a camp called Camp Otano. There was a man named George Lucer ran that camp. And he told me, never ask anybody to do something that you wouldn't do yourself. And he really gave me more backbone than anything else. I was out there as a camper, and for some reason they kept voting me best camper, and I came back as a counselor in training and a counselor, and he really made me grow up at least. You know, I don't want to get into it, but I joined the Army to get the heck out of the house, Tony.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about that in a little bit.
But I'm just saying to you,
right,
to give you an idea of the situation. So it's very hard for me to come up with a lot of stuff.
I understand.
We're talking. I flinched all the way up to I was 18 years old, and I had to learn to stop flinching when I went in the Army, because when they raised an arm, I was ducking. And that was a result of having a mother that kept hitting me in the head. And I still remember the day that she took a swing at me and I grabbed her arm and told her she couldn't do it anymore. So when I start to think about these things, Tony, it's hard for me to be very positive. I know I took care of my mother and did all kinds of things as a responsible son, but we did not have she was a very tough individual, and when she was upset, she'd go for the head, and that was not good.
Okay, let's
So
go back to
I'm not trying
that.
to-
So it sounds like that
You may want to
counselor.
throw this tape
No,
away.
no, it's okay. Let's switch topics though. The counselor though at that camp, where was that camp?
In Chesterland, Ohio.
And so it sounds like actually you had some father figures in your life that were probably better influences on you than your
Absolutely.
actual dad.
I think that I told you, Mr. Lucer was very strong.
That's nuts.
And he was all the way up till I was 17 years old. And then when I got in the Army, the first time I was in the Army, I was in Fort Hood, Texas. And believe it or not, the colonel, the colonel in charge of the whole damn division took a liking to me and offered to send me to West Point, and I didn't do it, which was the dumbest thing I ever did in my life. He was also, if you can imagine, I'm 17 or 18 years old, I'm in this place for a year under this program, and for some reason, he saw some leadership ability in me, and I actually, at 18 years old, after a year, I went out of the Army as a sergeant. If you can believe that, at 18, I had 3 stripes on my arm. And Colonel Murray wanted me to go to the point, and I didn't do it.
Well, the one way to look at it is, let's say you went to Westport. Then you go to Westport,
West Point,
West Point, you go there, and you're there from 18 to 22. Then you have an Army life. You never come back to Ohio.
oh, Tony, I'm just saying to
And
you,
then I'm not here to video record you.
there's no question about that. I'm
So
just saying,
it worked out okay.
When you asked me if I had any father figures.
No, I understand. I'm just saying though that it
listen,
might have been
I'm very happy the way life worked out. I wouldn't
Yeah.
have done it either.
right.
But
Everything.
I'm just saying, telling you asked me if I had any father figures, and he was one. Elmer Baben was one. These are guys that gave me some leadership.
That's-
George Frankel, Jerry Frankel, those are people that really led me along. But Elmer Baben really was a helper.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit more about family members, and then we can get on to some other stuff.
Okay.
Tell me a little bit about your uncles and aunts. Let's start with your 2 uncles on your dad's side. Was it Charlie and Alvin?
Alvin and Walter.
And Walter. Oh, Charlie was actually your grandfather's name, right?
That's right, that was my father's father.
So tell me about Alvin and Walter.
Well, I didn't know them really well. Walter lived over on Washington Boulevard, and he was married to a woman by the name of Helen, and they evidently had a jewelry business, which I didn't know about. And he had 2 sons, 2 sons and a daughter. And we just weren't that close to him. We'd go over and visit him once in a while, but we just didn't spend a lot of time with him. I think about it again. And Alvin lived at one time lived in Cleveland, and then he moved to Dallas, Texas, with Neiman Marcus. And so he had a son named Charlie, and Charlie, during the Second World War, was a test pilot, and he was testing P-51s in Africa. They'd ship them over and put them together, and then they go into combat, and he died testing one day, just fell apart.
Ah,
But and Suzanne, I don't know where she went, his daughter. But one time she stayed at our house for a while, but I didn't really get to know her.
and then what about your other uncle and his family?
Walter, I really don't know what happened. They all died very young. Walter died, then Alvin died, and then Dad died. They all died very young. Dad was 62, I think. They were all gone. Just not much family. That's the way it goes.
Okay. Tell me, what about on your mom's side? She had a brother.
Paul.
And I know
A
he married
really
Ann
nice,
Ostrid.
really nice guy, and he worked, I forget for whom, but he, later in his life, I don't know, had a breakdown or something and passed away. And his mother, his wife used to babysit us.
And me too.
And probably babysit you too, Ostrid.
Yeah.
And her Swedish meatballs.
I remember those.
Yeah, but that was then. She had a daughter named Mary, and she liked to ice skate too, and she had married a couple of times, and so had some nice kids, but we were never very tight.
It seemed like your mom and Aunt Ostrid, I remember the fact that I remember Aunt Ostrid coming over and taking care of us when we lived on Store Road when you and Mom would go out of town.
Right.
And she would make the meatballs. That's
Right.
what we look forward to. Everybody
Right.
looked forward to her meatballs.
Right.
And she was super nice. I remember
Oh,
her
yeah.
big hugs.
Very
and-
nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then what about any of your cousins? And we kind of covered that a little bit.
Yeah. I don't have.
All right, let's get into some fun stuff. Tell me a little bit. So Peter's your youngest, your first brother, the middle.
He's the middle.
Yeah.
Then Johnny.
Right. And Johnny's what, 10 or 12 years younger
He's
than
10
you.
years younger than I am. Peter's 4.5 years younger than I am.
Yeah, so you and Peter kind of grew up together.
Right.
And let's see. Did you help take care of Peter and Johnny?
Well, Peter, I babysat for, and I babysat for Johnny. But Peter, yeah.
Tell me any funny stories about that. I remember there's a story about the garage.
Well, we built a place in the garage. My friend up the street, we built a place called Goonhaven in the garage. It was hanging. It was a little hut hanging from the roof in the back of the garage. We had a ladder up there, and we'd go up there and we'd spend the night and sleep and everything else. We had lights up there, and we used to go up there, and that was, it was a place to hang out.
Yeah.
Probably held the garage together.
Wasn't there a fire or something at one point?
The only fire that was involved was involving you when you were at camp.
Okay. Let's talk about growing up with Peter, and then Johnny was, you were 10 when he was born, so he was just a baby, and
Yeah, Johnny, yeah, Peter, I remember them both. I remember taking Peter for pushing his wagon, his baby buggy up the street, and when I'm turning around, it almost tipped over and fighting to get it straight up again.
worried that he was going to come out of it.
Yeah, oh yeah, I was scared it was going to tip it over. I remember him coming home when he was looking out the window and seeing Dad drive up with him and bring him in the house.
Oh, you remember the first time you met him?
Oh yeah, I remember seeing him come home.
A little louder, okay, Dad. And what about Johnny? Do you remember when he came home?
Not really.
Yeah.
I just don't. I was 10. I don't remember. No, I don't remember.
Do you remember him as a little toddler?
The only time, it was a nice kid. One thing I remember him is when I got married the first time. He was there at the wedding. I don't really remember too much about Johnny as a little kid. I remember more as he got older. He came and lived with us because he didn't get along with Mother. And he lived with us for quite a while.
On Store Road.
Yeah, on Store Road.
Yeah, in Laurie's room, right?
I don't know where he stayed. But
Yeah, I remember hearing about that a little bit.
He stayed with us for quite a bit because he didn't get along with Mother either.
And were you? And today, do you feel like who are you closest to?
Of the brothers,
Yeah.
I probably spend more time with Johnny than I do with Peter, but I feel very close to both of them. They're very nice people.
And
Peter,
yeah.
well, Peter used to sometimes date somebody that I dated. when I went to, before I went to Korea, I was home and I met a young lady and we had a great hot and heavy time. And when I went to get to San Francisco, I called her up and I asked her if she would go steady with me. And she said yes. So I called up Peter and I asked him to take over my fraternity pin to her. And then I got on a boat, went 2 weeks to Japan and to Korea and writing letters. And about a month later, writing all these impassioned letters, I get this letter from her. She says, "You're not getting my mail, I'm going with Peter."
How'd that make you feel?
It was typical Peter, because he did that a couple of times. And it was really funny.
Well, it's kind of funny, but it probably pissed you off a little bit.
Well, it was kind of funny. I mean,
Well, looking back, it's pretty funny.
yeah, well,
Moving in on your girlfriends.
well,
Well, also, he's 4.5 years younger. I mean, how does that work out? Were they older than him?
no, they were younger.
But Dad, you were 17 or 18 years old when you went to the
To Korea, right?
I mean,
these girls were 16, and he was
13,
yeah.
and he's hitting on
Well,
your.
when I went to Korea, yeah, he was. That's right.
I don't. It doesn't sound like.
I'm telling you, that's what he did.
Well, good. You know what?
These girls were his age.
Oh, they were closer to his age.
Yeah, they were contemporaries of his. When I went to Korea, I was 19, he was 15, and these girls were 15 or 16 years old. It was ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a long time ago.
The point is, he was there to pick up where it was funny.
Was there anybody else associated with your family who was also important to you growing up, like like a nurse or a special family friend that came
No.
over a lot?
No,
Do you remember, like, on Sundays, did your parents ever have parties and invite
No.
friends over?
no. Mm-hmm. They had a pretty contentious relationship, those two. I remember when I told them to get a divorce. It was ridiculous.
Mm-hmm.
You probably want to tear this thing up because.
No, it's okay. We don't have to. You don't have to get into the details, and we can skip
But I'm just
that.
saying to you that it's.
We can skip that. Let's talk about some other things. Let's talk a little bit about your earliest memory as a kid.
As a kid?
Yeah, we had a dog. You had a Great Dane. What was that Great
Oh,
Dane?
that was Brenda, but we had dogs before that. We had Skippy and Dee Dee. Those were the first two dogs that I remember. They were. Then Brenda. Brenda was unbelievable.
What's your first memory that you can think back on?
I can remember having my tonsils taken out when I was about 4.5 years old. I remember going to the hospital, and I can remember I still remember when they gave me the gas, and I had a toy where the thing ran down, back and forth, up and down. I still can remember that. I mean, those are things that you always remember. I remember them giving me ice cream, and it hurt my throat.
Do you remember any stories that your mom or dad or anybody else told you about when you were a baby?
No.
Okay. What about the neighborhood you grew up? Where were you? Was that Scarborough?
No, way before Scarborough, we lived on, Christ, I can't remember, Edge Hill maybe, I can't remember this. We lived in a neighborhood, and, it was a long time ago, the days of when the milk came and by the milkman and it was cold, it would freeze and the cream would come up out of the top. It was before they pasteurized the milk.
And what about refrigeration and
Icebox. The guy come by and put 25 pounds or 50 pounds in the icebox.
was it one big ice block?
You had a sign in the front window, and the way they turned it, the iceman knew how much white ice to bring in to stick in the icebox to refrigerate it.
And he would just bring it right in and deliver it?
Yeah, they put it on their shoulder, come in, stick it in the icebox, and that was it. Those are the days.
Do you remember any of your playmates growing up?
I remember Bob Vittle, Junior, David Miller, I think that was his name. And that was from when I was 6 years old on up that I can really remember. I remember when I was younger than that, we lived on a street called Edge Hill. My folks got a letter from the neighbors. I was riding around on my little bike. I had one of these cars that you could pump, and I blew my horn. It scared her father or something like that. My father, I still have the letter written in 1935 that I should stop scaring him with my car.
Oh, really? You have the letter still?
Still have the letter.
Well, maybe what we'll do when we're finished here is we'll take a picture of the letter and we can insert this in here.
I'll have to get it out, yeah.
Yeah. Tell me more about the house you grew up in. Do you remember that? I remember you and Johnny and Peter went back there a few years ago and had a picture.
That was on
taken.
Scarborough Road.
That was Scarborough.
3387 East Scarborough.
3387
Yep.
East Scarborough?
Yep.
And you were raised, even your dad was Jewish, but your mom was a devout Catholic.
Right.
So you went to church. Tell me a little bit about
went to church. Right.
Why don't you tell me?
Even First Communion.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, there's not much to tell you. She made me go to church, to catechism and learn the rosary and all that other stuff. And got to the point where I was confirmed. And I was an altar boy, all that stuff. And then I got older, and I don't want to get into it, but I started asking questions. And I became Jewish.
Right, I remember that. You became Jewish when you married Mom, right?
Right.
Yeah.
It was just a very peaceful change of pace. I don't want to. Everybody is entitled to enjoy their religion the way they enjoy it. And, Donna's a devout Catholic, and God bless her, she loves it all. And so I don't interfere. When I went to Korea, I was a Catholic, and they told me, we went over the rules were off. We could eat meat on Friday and stuff like that. And when we came back from Korea, the minute we hit Japan, they didn't even let us get to where we were going to sleep, and they said all the Catholics had to go into to wherever we went, and they told us the rules were back on. And I thought to myself, they couldn't even let me put my bag down before they had to start that stuff again. So, that was that.
Okay, well, let's change topics to school. Do you remember where you went to nursery school or elementary school?
Elementary school, Fairfax.
Fairfax Elementary?
Yeah, I started there I don't know if I had kindergarten. Yeah, maybe even had kindergarten there. No, I had kindergarten in Coventry.
Mm-hmm.
In first grade, I was at Fairfax. And I stayed there all the way through elementary school, and then went to Heights High School.
Did you go to Roxborough too, or no?
I went to Roxborough in between. That's right.
Middle school?
Fairfax, Roxborough, then Heights.
Yeah. Yeah, as you know, the boys went to Roxborough for a little bit, but just elementary school. Does any single grade really stick out in your mind when you were growing up? Any teachers or any?
No, not really. Most amazing thing is when I graduated from Roxborough, I was 5'1" or 5'2". When I graduated from Heights, I was 6 feet tall.
Little growth spurt.
I would say it was a growth spurt.
What was your favorite memory as a child?
Favorite memories. I don't have anything that particularly stands out for me.
What about chores?
Probably going to Camp Otama was one of the outstanding things that happened to me. But that's, again, taking me back to Mr. Lucer.
Right.
Chores, we all had chores. Well, from putting up the clothesline, taking out the garbage, to cleaning the basement, to folding diapers, to running the mangle, which was a pressing thing to press diapers.
You had to press Johnny's diapers?
Sure. We all press sheets with it. It was one of these things that roll like this, and you could run it with your leg. Big mistake in learning how to do that. Everybody, in those days when it snowed, we all went out with our shovel and tried to get a job shoveling people's sidewalks, driveways. The snowplows were a non-existent thing. Our phone number was 1588. We had a party line until we finally got a private line. That was big stuff.
Any ambitions as a child? What did you want to be when you grew up? Did you have anything in mind?
No, I really didn't. I had no idea what was going on. I tell you, what straightened me out was when I graduated from high school, spent a year at Miami, Oxford, and then I went in the Army.
What were the doctors like when you were growing up?
Oh, they all came to the house. Dr. Epstein was our pediatrician. I can still remember I had earaches, and he came over, and my mother held me still, and he punctured my eardrums with needles to let out what they assumed was infection.
Oh,
I remember that pretty good.
it must have hurt.
Didn't hurt, scared the hell out of me. That was the big thing, being held still so that he could,
Mm-hmm.
that kind of crap. And I remember they decided I needed braces, and I hated having them do those impressions where I had to bite into that crap in order to make,
Yeah, it's still bad today.
and they thought I had allergies, so I went to Dr. Shapiro, and he do those little pinpricks in your skin to see what you were allergic to. Found I was allergic to dust and tried to use that as an excuse for not cleaning the basement. That lasted about 4 minutes. So that was the doctors.
Any kind of neighborhood characters or crabby neighbors or crazy
No.
people in the area?
No.
I mentioned yesterday Halloween pranks played as a child. Do you remember any pranks that you played as a kid?
At Halloween, we used to go out and take a piece of thread and put it through the screen door and attach it to the knocker. And then go across the street, and you could, wrap the door. And when the guy would open the door, he couldn't see the string, and they'd close it, and you could wrap it real fast, and they'd open it, trying to figure out how the hell you were doing it. And then they'd see it and figure it out, and they'd just say pretty good. The other thing, in those days, the front steps were always loose, so we were always moving them away and putting them on the porch or something like that. And the other one was streetcars. If you could sneak up behind them and pull the thing off the overhead wire, they gave me the power, but it was just, they'd stop and go out and put it back on again. That was about it.
What about Thanksgiving? Do you remember anything about Thanksgiving as a kid?
No. I remember a Christmas where I was out delivering flowers for Ethel Dreyfus, and it was snowing like hell. I got home and everybody had had Christmas dinner and everything else, when I got back.
What about 4th of July, tomorrow being the 4th of July? Do you remember fireworks?
No, never played with them.
Did you ever go see fireworks?
Never played with firecrackers. Never.
Do you remember going to see fireworks?
I remember going to see fireworks, later on over to Shaker Country Club, but they were, no.
But not as a kid?
No, they never, as I recall, they never had displays like they do today for the 4th of July, that I remember. I will tell you this, when I did come back from Korea, I went into Louisville and they fixed me up with a very nice young lady, and we went out and we went to the drive-in theater. I was sitting there with her, all of a sudden, they fired off, I didn't know it was the 4th of July, or didn't realize it. And they fired off one of those things. I think the minute it went off, I was on the floor of that car.
Oh, a rocket?
Yeah, whatever it was, I was on the floor of that car. Got a lot of sympathy after that. I just, it was an automatic reaction, bang, I was down on the floor of the car.
Let's see here. I wanted to ask you about, there was something else here. Oh yeah. What about family vacations? Remember any
We
trip?
never went. Never. Now, think about,
That's a pick-me-upper.
I'm telling you,
I
we never
understand.
went on a family vacation. I went fishing with my father on occasion.
Well, that's a
Never,
little,
never one where mother and the father went together. And that's what you're asking me. I used to go fishing with my father later on in life, but never ever a family vacation. Now you know where it came from, where we always went on a family vacation.
Right. What about family pets?
We just had dogs. My mother had cats at one time, and in those days there weren't litter boxes, at least that I know of, and it was a mess.
Okay. Well, let's move on a little bit then. Let's move on to junior high school and high school. Any memories at all?
Junior high school, not too much. I'll tell you one thing. I remember my mother switched me from Fairfax to Jesu for my 7th and 8th grade. And she dressed me in a pair of gray shorts, a shirt and a tie, and a jacket. And they walked me into this room, and hysteria broke loose. I'll never forget it as long as I live. Dressed me up like that. It put me in such trouble with those kids for so long, it was unreal.
Any funny memories of junior high school and high school?
High school, they had auto shop, they had I did that all 3 years. I really got to know how to take a car apart and put it together. And
A little louder, Dad, please.
I remember doing very well. I used to love the speech class. They had a speech class. I loved going and giving speeches and talks. I had no problem doing that. It paid off for me later in life. I made speeches at insurance conventions and stuff. I never had a problem doing that. And when I was in the Army, I was an instructor. I did a lot of teaching, if you can believe it or not, when I was in the States.
Oh, that's nice.
High school, I joined a fraternity called Atrix, and they were very nice people. It was a very difficult time because in those days, if you were Jewish and Christian, getting into a fraternity was impossible. The Jewish fraternity, CBT, wouldn't take me because my mother was Catholic, and most of the fraternities wouldn't take you because your father was Jewish. It was really something. I remember defending my father one time. Somebody made some remarks. I said, listen, you're talking about my father, and he's the guy that's taking us to football games and taking us.
A little louder, okay, Dad?
He was the one that was taking us to see Heights High School play in Massillon or wherever the football games were, and then taking us out to eat afterwards. He was very, very nice about all that stuff, and they were making, anti-Semitic remarks. And the same thing happened when I went to college down at Miami University at Oxford. The Christian fraternities wouldn't take me, and the Jewish fraternities wouldn't take me.
Do you remember African Americans when you were growing up in Cleveland?
Oh yeah, I had no problem. Do I remember them? They were segregated out. I remember it was just a bad time. Everybody had very nasty remarks. If something was wrong, there was a nigger in the woodpile. That kind of stuff. But they also referred to Jews as kikes and Italians as wops, and it was a whole crazy situation. The one thing I'll tell you is I grew up with learning not to be prejudiced. When I was in the Army, they stationed at Fort Hood, Texas. I can show you a thing. It was still the black and white business in those days. When you got on a bus in Texas, they had a sign up on the top for the whites and the blacks. And I got on a bus one day and went and sat in the back of the bus, and they wouldn't drive that bus till I got up and moved to the white section. It didn't bother me one bit where I was went. And then when I was at Fort Hood, they took me over as a sergeant to train a black platoon, and I was the only white person in that platoon. Of 25 guys, I was the the sergeant, maybe there were more than 25. And I got kinds of commendation for that, but I didn't see it that way. I had no problem training those guys or being with them, and I think they respected me for that ability.
Good for you. Good for you. What about hairstyles and clothing?
Oh, well, you know, everybody, there was a time when everybody wore a butch that was short, and your hair was about yay high. What's his name? The guy on television still does it. That one football commentator wears a bush haircut.
Mm-hmm.
But and then all of a sudden, everybody started to wear it long, and they have ducktails in the back, and everybody was using Vaseline and stuff on their hair, and you run a comb through it, you come up with a handful of grease. But all that went away. And then, of course, the blacks were using afros. But I never did anything crazy. Just never did anything crazy.
Did you have a car?
No, my father, we had one car.
What was it?
I don't know, it might have been a Pontiac or something. We got a second car after the Second World War, I think. Maybe not. I remember my father went away one time and I came back and I'd stuck a squirrel tail on I forget it was on this. Anyhow, it made me take it off.
Tell me about, did you play any sports in high school or?
In high school, no. In college, I ran cross country.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, I remember you telling me about that you did that. How were your grades in school?
Middle. It's a CB player.
Were there any heroes or idols that you had in your teenage years?
No, not that I know of.
What about radio and movies? Did you go to the movies a lot?
Pardon me?
Did you go to the movies?
Oh yeah, we used to go every Saturday. There was always they always had whatever it was a double feature, and they'd have these things like Flash Gordon and so forth. They'd show you a 15-minute segment. You went every week just to keep following it. But that was the big. Every Saturday, everybody went to the Cedar Lead Theater. You watch the doubleheader and come home.
How much was it to go to the movies back then?
Probably a dime.
Mm-hmm.
I remember riding our bicycles to Euclid Beach Park. Now, if you remember where Scarborough Road was, and you remember Euclid Beach was, that was quite a bicycle ride, but we could ride there. And we used to ride our bicycle down to Wade Park Lagoon, where they had the rowboats down by the art museum. I remember the biggest accomplishment was riding the bicycle, being able to ride the bicycle up Cedar Hill.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in those days they didn't have any gears. You just pumped yourself up there.
Let's see. What about the Indians? Did you go to any Indians games? You remember the World?
Yeah.
Do you remember the World Series?
I went to see Satchel Paige.
Oh yeah. Tell me about like that. What was that like?
I'm sure you know the story of Satchel Paige, but he was one of the great Negro players, and now Bill Vick got him on the team as a pitcher. And I remember one day, especially, somebody was on first base and bleeding off. And he looked over at him and he took his glove off and went like this. Told him, shave at him for leading off. It was really funny. He had a hesitation pitch where he'd throw the ball and it would loop like a softball. Drove nuts. But,
He was the manager of the team.
yeah. And he also played shortstop or second base, I can't remember which. And of course, Al Rosen was third base at one time. Knowing him was unbelievably nice thing to know.
What about politics back then, Dad? Were you involved at all? I mean, I guess Roosevelt was president of the country for the first 15 years of your life.
Pardon me?
Roosevelt was president for the first 15 years of your life.
That's right.
Do you remember anything about local politics or national politics?
No, I just remember that we were Republicans. My father was a Republican. Everybody was a Republican, no matter what. I remember for 1948 when Israel got going, and Rabbi Hillel Silver was, are you all right?
Yes.
Very active, and he was a Clevelander. That's a whole other part of my life, if you ever want to talk about it.
What's that?
My relationship with Danny Silver.
Yeah, we'll get there in a little bit. But I kind of want to do it a little bit more in a kind of chronological order. Do you remember any music that you liked as a kid or as a teenager into high school?
I liked, I was into smooth music like Stardust and stuff like that. I like slow music. I was not into jitterbug.
Did you talk about like some dates? Do you remember your first date?
My first date?
Mm-hmm.
No.
What about your first kiss?
I don't know, Tony. My first theoretical girlfriend was a girl by the name of Jane Fraser, and she was a consular in training out at Camp Ottawa, and we were. Well, she was like first date. Very, when I was a freshman at Miami, Oxford, she came down for homecoming weekend, and then I joined the Army. After my first year at Miami, Oxford, came back and went over to the house to see her. I knocked on the door, and the door opened, and her mother yells down, "Who is it?" And she says, "Roger Zucker," and she said, "He can't come in." So that was the end of that.
I thought you were going to tell me that Peter was going out with her.
No. But those, I got to tell you, okay.
What was the dating behavior back then? I mean, were you able to meet the parents? Would you pick them up at their? Did you have a car you'd pick them up in?
I had to use the family car. I didn't have my own car.
And what would you do on a typical date? Do you remember?
Go to the movies, and then we go to they had places where you go and they come out on rollers, not on roller skates, come out and bring you your food to your car.
Yeah.
And you sit in the car and have your hamburger or whatever at the end of the date and take them home. If you really were, you go to Shaker Lake sometimes in Neck. But,
I remember that one little area,
yeah,
Lover's Lane.
That street was always just crowded, and everybody was parked there. Big deal.
And what about so back then, were people more secretive about sex than they are today?
About what?
About sex.
I don't think anybody was secretive. Nobody ever, I don't want to get into it, but nobody ever conceived of doing what they're doing today as teenagers. I mean, nobody ever that I knew of was intimate with their girlfriend.
Did you? How did you learn about sex? Did you learn about it from your parents? Did they teach you?
Are you kidding?
Well, who taught you the birds and the bees? Do you remember?
Pardon me?
Who taught you about the birds and the bees?
I remember asking my mother something one time, and she explained it to me, and her remark was that I said, you and Dad did that 3 times?
Well, that's pretty funny. Why don't we take a teeny little break now,
Okay.
and then we'll start up again in a little bit.